right.
No. Where's Maria?
All right. So when we talk about cells, we will look at a few different types of cells, and we'll see in the next week or so all of these cells. So what we have here are human cheek cells, cells from an onion. These are red onion cells. These are cells from an aquatic plant called Elodea. These are some more cheek cells, and then these are cells from just a regular yellow onion. So you can see in all of these small little structures. Some are circular, some are oval, some are rectangular, but they all are cells. And so what is a cell? A cell, we could talk about it in a few different ways. But one of the things that we say is that a cell is sort of the basic unit of life. And that all living things are made of cells. Okay? And they're found in all living things. So the basic unit of life that is makes up everything that's alive. So it wasn't until the 16 and 1700s when people first started to really learn about cells. Why was it then that people started to study cells more seriously? 16 and 1700. Olivia? Why not? Yes. Wasn't until people started developing and inventing microscopes that people were able to really see individual cells. Because cells are small, you really need a microscope to see them. So some of the first scientists that really studied cells, one was a gentleman named Robert Hooke. He was the first to see cells. He used like a very one of the first compound microscopes to look at various things. And this is one of the drawings he made that he published. And this is a section of cork.
What's cork?
So what is cork? I was just going to ask you that. It's in like a wine bottle. That wooden plug is a cork. Or that's a cork board. Where does cork come from? It's a type of wood. Here's a sample of cork. This is a bigger piece. It's sort of spongy. It's kind of soft. And so Robert Hooke took thin slices of cork, we'll pass this around, looked at them under the microscope, and he drew them. And what he saw was when he looked at that, what he thought was a solid piece of cork, there are all these little sections to it. And what he was seeing were the remains of the living cells that made up that cork. Now, it wasn't alive when he looked at it. It was the bark. It was no longer living. But he could see the outline of those cells. And he named them cells. He saw these little boxes, and he called them cells. I've heard different stories. Some people said they looked like the rooms that monks would sleep in. They're cells in a monastery, and called them cells. Other people I've heard him say they look like the cells of a honeycomb that a bee would make, but he called them cells. He came up with that term. They weren't at that time alive. These cork cells weren't alive, but Anton van Leeuwenhoek was another scientist. He was the first to actually see living cells. He developed he developed microscopes in a sort of a different way. He came up with a way to make very good lenses consistently. So his microscopes could give a great magnification. And he saw living cells in things like pond water, blood, plaque from between a person's teeth. And what he saw was that, like, when he took a sample of pond water, of what looked like just clear water, he saw that when he looked at it in his microscope, there were living living things in there. They were tiny little creatures moving around. They're made of just a single cell. They're so small you can't see them without a microscope, but when he looked at them in his microscope, he saw them. He would look at a sample of blood, and he found it's not just a red liquid, it's actually a clearish liquid that has these red, what we call now red blood cells, these little discs sort of floating in the liquid, and that's what makes it red. Okay? And he saw that in his microscope. He looked at the plaque between people's teeth, and what he found there was very, very tiny cells that are bacteria. So he saw living bacteria as well. So Leeuwenhoek studied all of these various things. He published a book with all of his drawings and so forth, and he's one of the main people known for their work with the microscope and understanding the cell.
What if this breaks? Does it like...
So after there are many other scientists that studied cells in various ways, as microscopes got better, scientists can look at finer and finer detail and see things more clearly. And they started to come up with these ideas that we call the cell theory. And the cell theory basically is like a set of statements that sort of describe cells. So there's three parts to it. First is that all life is made up of at least one or sometimes more than one cell. So all life is made of cells. Second part says that cells are the smallest form of life. You can't have anything that's a living organism that's smaller than a cell. A cell is the smallest form of life. And then the last has to do with where these cells come from. Where do they come from? Where does a cell come from, Anthony? Yeah. Cells come from other living cells. So they don't just sort of pop into existence. They come from other cells. Cells can divide. Cells can reproduce. Does everyone see the cork?
No,
and
we did.
Those cells come from other cells. So we call these ideas put together the cell theory. Okay? We're made of trillions of cells, yes. All right, so the other thing is that when we look at cells, we see that within a single cell, there are parts within that. We call those parts organelles. It's going to be an important term. These are called cell organelles. And if you look at the word, obviously, it looks like the word organ. So, for example, in a human, you have your heart, which is an organ, or your brain, your lungs, your kidneys. Those are organs. Parts within our body. They each have a certain job to do to help us stay alive. Our kidneys filter our blood. Our lungs take in oxygen. Our heart pumps blood throughout our body. Those are organs. An organelle is kind of like an organ you would find within a cell. It's a part within a cell that has a certain job to do. It has what we call function. And in the next several slides, we're going to learn about several of these cell organelles and what their function is. What do they do? Because they each have a special job to help the cell function, to help it stay alive. So we'll talk about these cell organelles, but again, they're just parts within a cell. And we'll talk about sort of what they look like, how you identify them, what their job is. All right, so to start, I have here on the screen are two types of cells. One of these is a plant cell, one of them is an animal cell. Does anybody have an idea which is which? Hold on. Yep. Mary?
The first one is an animal cell.
This one?
Yeah.
And that's a plant cell? Why did you decide that? Just guess? Anthony, what do you think?
The opposite.
Why did you think that?
Because the first one, it's green and it has like things that would probably be found in plants because they're more consecutive with each other.
All right. Well, you are right. This is a plant cell. This is an animal cell. And you're also partially right in that this plant cell is green. And there's a reason for that, and we'll talk about that.
And the leaves are green. The inside of it looks like chicken wings.
Okay. It's not really supposed to look like chicken, but all right. So yeah, that one on the left is the plant cell. The one on the right is an animal cell. Okay. We can tell by the shape. Plant cells are usually rectangular. Animal cells have a flexible outer coating, so their shape can change. There's certain parts within the plant cell that are not present in the animal cell. And one important thing is the cell wall. So this outer layer of the plant cell, this thick, darker green layer, it's called the cell wall. Animal cells don't have one of these. They don't have a thick cell wall like this. Only plant cells. And this cell wall is important. It's made of a material called cellulose. And it's sort of a hard outer shell. Think of it as like a shell around the outside of the plant cell. It's rigid. It's not flexible. It's rigid. It gives the plant cell its shape. It also protects the plant cell. And it's actually not a living part of the cell. Sort of like the plant makes the cell wall and then it's no longer living. It can't change shape. It's just sort of stuck there. It's a shell.
Do you get to look at one?
Yeah, and what you were holding when I passed around the cork, basically what that is the remaining cell walls of a whole bunch of plant cells. When Robert Hooke looked at his microscope at those little boxes, all the inside living parts of those cells were dead, and what he was seeing was the outer remaining cell wall from each of those. So the cell wall is an outer shell, but then after that, you move inside a little bit, then we have a living part, the cell membrane. So the cell wall is plants only. And some other things like fungi and some bacterial bugs. We're just going to compare plant and animal cells. Jake?
So even say a piece of paper that's not living, will it still have
No, because it's been processed so much and the wood gets chopped up and mixed with chemicals, you wouldn't see any cells there.
What would you see?
Just the paper fibers. So then we have the cell membrane. The cell membrane is the outer layer here on the animal cell. It's also here in the plant cell just underneath the cell wall. But it is a living part. It's very, very thin. It's flexible. Its shape can change because it's a living part of the cell. One of its main jobs is to allow certain things into the cell and block other things. The cell membrane controls what can go into and out of the cell. So we have the cell wall in the plant, then the cell membrane. Here in the animal cells, just the cell membrane. That's why the animal cell is sort of roundish in shape, because it has that flexible outer layer, that cell membrane, that can be a round shape. Then filling up the space. So here in the animal cell, all this blue stuff or all this sort of light green here filling up much of the plant? Filling up that space is a material that's called cytoplasm.
Oh, we learned about that before.
Cytoplasm basically just fills up the cell. It holds the other organelles in place. It's not really, sometimes people compare it to like Jell-O. You ever have like Jell-O dessert with like chunks of fruit stuck in it?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I don't like it. But anyway,
You like that?
if you imagine like the Jell-O part was kind of be like the cytoplasm. It holds the organelles in place, but really it's not as solid. It's more liquid. It can move. The cytoplasm can move from one part of the cell to another. So if I look at this diagram, or this photo, it's taken under the microscope. I see two cells. So are these plant or animal cells?
Animal.
Why animal? They're roundish. They have only one thin outer layer. What do we call that thin layer?
Cell membrane.
That's the cell membrane. What is this white area?
Cytoplasm.
Yes, and we'll talk about this dark area in a minute. So yeah, that's cytoplasm. That dark area in this slide, that's the nucleus. This dark, dense area is the nucleus.
Nuclear membrane. We learned about these.
The nucleus is an important part of the cell because the nucleus contains something very important. It contains an organism's DNA. It's genetic material. Okay. So this is a cell sort of cut in half. This purple sort of cylinder, or purple sphere, is the nucleus. In the picture, it's kind of been cut in a quarter so you could look into it. Really, it would be a round shape. And you can see it's a large organelle. You can see it pretty easily when you look at cells. And it has some parts. The outer layer is called the nuclear membrane. And this nucleus, because it contains the DNA, it's sort of the control center of the cell, we sometimes say. The brain, we might say.
Oh, I put
Tells your body how to work. The outer layer of the nucleus is called the nuclear membrane. Separates the nucleus from all the other cytoplasm. This is an electron microscope image of a nucleus. You can see this round shape, that's the nuclear membrane.
Have you ever looked into one of those?
No. So this nuclear membrane that's around the outside nucleus has little holes in it called pores, and they keep some things in the nucleus and other things they allow to go through. Also in the nucleus is a structure called the chromosomes, and these are very important because this is where the DNA is. These store our genetic information. Each of your cells contains 46 of these chromosomes. And those 46 chromosomes tell exactly how your body works, exactly what you look like. It's all specified in the DNA, in this molecule. So the chromosomes are very important. And then besides the chromosomes, within the nuclear membrane is another thing. It's called the nucleolus. It's sort of a darker, dense area. You can see it here. It's just a round in shape. And this nucleolus it means little nucleus, the word. And its job is to create another organelle called a ribosome. That's what the nucleolus does. It creates these ribosomes. So these are all parts of the nucleus. The nuclear membrane, the chromosomes, and the nucleolus.
How do you know that that purple thing is in the cell?
You can see it, and you guys will see it. We'll do a lab
Oh, is it like?
later in the week when you'll add a stain to a cell, and you can see this dark area that's in the cytoplasm. You won't see chromosomes. They're too small to see individually in our microscopes. Kaylee?
When you're born, don't you have a certain amount of chromosomes? Like, doesn't
came from your mother, 23 came from your father. It's always split evenly, and that's why you have those certain characteristics of your parents, is because you inherited half of your chromosomes from your mother and half from your father.
What if you're twins?
Twins have the same chromosomes because they formed from the same zygote. Yeah, there are situations a person can be born with an extra chromosome in their cells. The Down syndrome is when a person is born and all their cells have one extra 21st chromosome. So rather than having 46 chromosomes, a person with Down syndrome has 47 chromosomes in every cell. They have one extra 21st chromosome. And there are other chromosomal abnormalities when a person may be born with an extra 13th chromosome or an extra X or Y chromosome. So there are some situations, but they all lead to problems in development. Okay, our last slide here, a few more organelles to talk about. So the endoplasmic reticulum, it's a mouthful, but we often abbreviate it ER, endoplasmic reticulum. And it's a series of tubes sort of that are usually situated right near the nucleus. And you can see a diagram here. It's this windy tube. Here's an actual electron microscope image of these tubes. And what the ER does is it transports things around the cell. The job of the ER, its function, is to transport things. Materials that the cell needs, materials the cell makes. Now sometimes people have difficulty remembering all these organelles, so I have a few things to try to help you. ER, if you remember, like if you got hurt, you'd have to be transported to the emergency room. ER, emergency room, transport. So the job of ER is to transport things. Now you'll notice there's two types of ER. Smooth ER it's just smooth on the outside. Rough ER has all these little dots on it. Those dots are another organelle called a ribosome. Their job is to make proteins. This is where, in our cells, proteins can be made. And we need a lot of protein. Our cells are mostly made of protein. Our muscles are all made of protein. So our body needs to make a lot of it. It's made in these tiny little dots called ribosomes. Yeah. So sometimes to help people remember, ribosomes, first three letters make what word?
Rib.
Rib. Anyone like to eat ribs?
Me.
Oh, yeah, they're meat. What nutrient does meat have? Protein. So if you remember ribs, protein, you can remember the ribosome's job is to make protein.
Doesn't everything have protein in it?
Not everything. So a ribosome's job is to make protein. Some of these ribosomes are attached to the ER like these, or these little dots. Others are just kind of floating around on their own in the cytoplasm. And then our last organelle for today are the Golgi bodies. These Golgi bodies, they look similar sometimes to the ER, but their job is different. What they do is they take up things that the cell creates, like proteins, that are going to be sent out of the cell, and they kind of package them up to leave the cell. It's kind of like the post office of the cell. You know, one example, our pancreas. What hormone does our pancreas produce? Did we talk about this already?
Nope. No.
That regulates our blood sugar?
No clue.
You know what hormone regulates our blood sugar?
Nope.
A person with diabetes may have to give themselves injections of this, or may have a pump that gives them this?
Nope.
No?
Isn't it the thing they have on themselves?
Yeah, it could be. It's a call.
Isn't it like a medicine?
It is.
Something you give to the doctor?
It's insulin.
Oh.
Insulin allows our body to regulate our blood sugar. So cells in our pancreas make insulin and send it into our blood to circulate around. So in our pancreas cells, they have to make a lot of this insulin. It's a protein. So they make that insulin. The ribosomes make the protein. It starts by being produced in the ER, on those ribosomes. Then it gets sent out here to the Golgi bodies. They package up this insulin in a little bubble and send it out to the cell membrane where it then leaves the cell. The Golgi bodies look, I sometimes say, like a stack of pancakes with drops of syrup on them. Okay? The drops of syrup are these little bubbles that are leaving the cell. Okay? They're being packaged up here in these Golgi bodies. So when we look at this diagram of the cell, what organelle is this?
Cytoplasm. That's a thing already.
This one.
Oh, the outside wall cell.
No.
Oh my
Is
god.
it a cell wall?
Yes.
Oh no.
What is it?
Cell membrane.
That's the cell membrane. This is an animal cell. This is the nucleus. This is the ER. On it, these little dots are the ribosomes. This area here are the Golgi bodies. Okay, so those are the organelles we've covered so far. Any questions about those? Okay, I want to show you just a brain pop section here.